Last fall's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill included billions of dollars to supposedly save Mother Earth from carbon dioxide generated by human activities. The Biden administration intends for carbon capture and renewal technology to let us meet the goal President Biden has set for us for zero carbon emissions by 2050. I'm Rebecca Terrell, senior editor with the New American Magazine. And with me today is Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center for the American Experiment, where he covers energy and environment issues, including mining and electricity policy. He's a former research fellow at the Heartland Institute and an award-winning geology researcher. We're very pleased that he's with us today. Welcome, Isaac.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
You bet. Well, the first thing that came to my mind when I heard that President Biden wants to build giant machines to vacuum carbon dioxide directly from the air was Dr. Seuss. And I cannot get that surreal and warped image out of my head. So maybe you can help me wrap my mind around this. What is carbon capture and what is carbon removal? Can you explain those technologies to us?
Yeah, so there's a few different technologies that are being proposed. There's carbon capture and sequestration from fossil fuel plants like coal plants or natural gas plants. That one's less silly. And then you also have people talking about direct air capture, which is people hoping to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and sequester it underground. So what they do is they take the CO2, they capture it, and then they inject it into underground rock formations that are essentially old oil and natural gas formations. So in some areas, they actually use captured CO2 in order to enhance oil recovery. So there are practical uses for CO2, but that doesn't mean that subsidizing carbon capture and sequestration is the right policy for the United States.
Right. Could it survive in a truly free market on its own? Would there be a use for it in that way?
So in some instances, yes, there is a business argument that you can make for CO2 capture. And like I said, that's mostly enhanced oil and natural gas recovery. What happens is you have old oil wells that aren't producing as much as they used to. So oil producers will inject CO2 down into that oil formation, and it actually pushes the oil and gas towards the well. So you can, utilize existing oil and gas infrastructure in order to get more out of the ground, which is a good thing. However, the idea that it's ever going to be cost effective to just remove this stuff from like a coal plant and inject it underground in a way that isn't enhancing oil recovery, I don't think that there's necessarily a business case for that, right? So that would be the product of a subsidy. So yeah, that's kind of the interplay here. There's a cost to carbon capture for sure.
And now on the other end of things, describe what it does to a power plant's output and efficiency.
Yeah, so they call this parasitic load. It takes about 1/3 of the electricity that a power plant produces in order to capture this CO2 and liquefy it and then pump it underground. So that's also an opportunity cost there, right? Because if you are having the same expenses for overhead, but producing less power, that means electricity is more expensive for, families and businesses.
Okay. And then when it comes to direct air capture, I read in Geoengineering Monitor that some proponents are suggesting you would need a small nuclear power plant attached to the direct air capture to supply the energy needs for it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, otherwise, direct air capture would be a net increaser of emissions, right? So the only way that things like direct air capture could ever make sense is if you had a huge fleet of nuclear power plants that was producing, electricity without emissions, and then you could use all that extra power in order to, run machines that either desalinate water or, capture CO2 from the air or turn CO2 streams into like synthetic gasoline. So really, but if you're going to do that, there's no point for the CO2 capture because you've already got all the energy you would need with the nuclear power plant.
Okay, and now let's talk about the pipelines. They say that we're going to have to add something like between 30,000 and 60,000 miles of pipeline. And tell me about that, especially about the dangers associated with those pipelines.
Yeah, so there's a lot of CO2 pipelines that are already in operation. So they are carrying CO2 to oil fields in order to do that. So there isn't really a danger from CO2 pipelines. I think that it's important to stress that. Like I'm a big proponent of pipelines in general, whether that's oil, natural gas, or a CO2 pipeline. If you have an economic end use, shouldn't be something that people are necessarily worried about from a health and safety perspective. If you don't want it on your property, that's fine, right? Like yeah, so there are a bunch of ethanol producers in the Midwest that are looking to ship their CO2 to North Dakota to sequester it underground so they can, have lower carbon intensity ethanol. And they're doing that because of a policy in California that rewards them for sequestering their CO2, right? So really, when we're talking about carbon capture and sequestration, whether that's from a coal plant, an ethanol plant, or direct air, it's all policy based, right? The reason that we're doing it is because the policy levers that are being pulled in the government are all going that direction.
Okay. And so what's the message here for taxpayers? All of this, these billions of dollars in the infrastructure bill are going to prevent a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in global temperature by the year 2050. Is that a plausible argument?
Yeah. But the other thing is like, I've probably sounded pretty negative on carbon capture so far, but I also think it's smarter than wind and solar, right? So the amount of power that you can produce with a coal plant with carbon capture and sequestration is a lot more than you're going to get on average with wind or solar. And we subsidize those too, even more than we do with carbon capture. So there's a coal facility in North Dakota, two of them actually, that are looking to install CCS, carbon capture and sequestration equipment on there. And then they sell that power to Minnesota. So when I'm looking at the cost of different, energy portfolios, right? Like I'm saddened by the fact that there is a parasitic load, there is a big cost to carbon capture and sequestration, but that's really nothing when it comes to wind, solar, and battery storage. Like the costs are very minimal. So when we're making these choices, we need to make sure that we're weighing, okay, well, maybe this policy is less than ideal because I don't like subsidies for any energy source, but would it be better or worse for taxpayers to embrace, CO2 sequestration? Or is it better to keep squandering money on wind turbines that only work for 20 years and solar panels that only work for, 25? Then, you start to weigh things in a little bit more nuanced way, for sure.
And why don't subsidies work for energy companies?
Well, I mean, they work for the energy companies, right? Because they're the ones making bank off the taxpayers' expense. But the main thing, what people need to remember about a subsidy is a payment that the government makes to encourage rational people to do irrational things, right? The entire point of a subsidy is to get somebody to do something that they would not otherwise do. So, I think that that's something that, free market people kind of lose sight of sometimes. We just say, oh, well, they're spending money. It's the subsidy. That's bad. But it's really, you're encouraging this irrational action. That's the bad thing, right?
Right. You've given us some great information here today, Isaac. Thank you so much for being here. Can you please let everyone know how to learn more and how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit americanexperiment.org. I work at Center of the American Experiment. You can also find me on Twitter at the Fracking Guy. And that's it. That's all you need to know.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.